Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Joel Nunez, and I'm the Director of Content and Experience at Momentum Events. The events team here has been working behind the scenes to seamlessly transition the second AI in Medical Affairs Virtual Summit. Before we start, I would love to see where everybody is tuning in from. So if you can put in the chat where you guys are tuning in, I would love to see where everyone is located. Myself, I'm in Costa Rica. We have many people coming in. I know that some of you sent me emails yesterday saying you're from Australia. So I would love to see if you can put in the chat where everyone is tuning in from. I would love to see where everyone is based. I'm going to see the chat here. I know we have some people from New York. I know we have people from Italy. We have people from all around the world. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It's going to be an amazing event. We actually we are hoping to have this event in person next year. We'd love to meet all of you in person, but I guess we'll have to wait until 2023 or in October, where we actually will be hosting our Medical Affairs Excellence Summit in Philadelphia. So be sure to keep an eye on that. But for now, we have developed a virtual event experience to ensure that you get the incomparable content and experience you have come to expect from this event. And before I hand the reins over to our chairs and our first presenter, I want to take a moment to familiarize all of you with the offerings and capabilities of our virtual event platform. So upon logging in, you will land on the reception page. So if you want to know how our platform works, be sure to go watch the welcome video on the reception page. This page allows you to preview future sessions, speakers, upcoming meetings you have set, sessions you have bookmarked, and more. No matter what part of the platform you are on, you will always be able to navigate using the top menu and the global side panel, which you will find on the right of your screen. In the top menu, you will find the agenda tab, which is where you will join all of our sessions from. On this page, you can bookmark a session or even add it to your calendar. Once you're ready to join the session, click Join Session button to enter the stream. There are many opportunities for you to view and interact once inside the session itself. On the right-hand side, you will find a chat window, the Q&A, and polling available for this session. You can react with emojis to any comment or even learn more about the commenter by clicking on their profile picture. You will see that the global side panel is also visible inside the session, so you can still navigate as you please. One of the most interactive and important parts of the platform is our speaker roundtables. Here is where we'll have our interactive speaker Q&A session during the event. During the designated networking breaks, please make sure to take advantage of this time to join our Meet the Speaker roundtables, which you can join by going into the agenda and joining the breaks. This feature is really important. You will not only have the opportunity to hear from the speakers, but you will also have the opportunity as well to build relationships with people that are on the same path as you are when it comes to artificial intelligence in medical affairs. The next tab on our top menu is our Partners tab. Our Partners tab, or our partners have helped us make this event possible, and we encourage you to stop by to take a look at the resource centers they have put together to share with our audience today. If you have a question from our partners, use the chat on the right-hand side of the booth, or click on the profiles of one of the booth members to ask a question. We also suggest using your break times to explore the platform and learn more about our sponsor via the booth found when you click the Partners tab. Special thank you to all of our sponsors, H1, VMLY, and our Health and Acceleration Point. Finally, you will find our notification center and the ability to edit your profile on the upper right-hand corner of the platform. The notification center will show you incoming meeting requests, announcements from the organizing team, and the paper plane icon will show you chats you have ongoing with other attendees. So as you can see, there are many opportunities to engage with others at this event and on this platform. So we encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity, not just to listen in on this great content, but to get to know others through the event platform as well. So don't be afraid to ask questions, put your comments on the chat, set up meetings with your peers, and truly take advantage of the platform to learn and network with others. Lastly, we have our leaderboard engagement contest. This contest rewards attendees for being interactive through the entire event on the platform. So we will announce these winners at the close of the event. To see your standing in the leaderboard, use the global side panel on the right hand side. A quick tip: you get the most points for winning a contest by visiting a sponsor booth or setting up a one-on-one meeting with other attendees. If you have any questions throughout the event, please sure to email our marketing team at Noelia, which is Nancy Nancy OELIA at Momentum Events, and she will be able to help you with anything that you may need. We want to make sure that you have the best experience with us here today. If there's anything or if there's something that you would like to share with the Momentum team that you think we will be able to improve your experience here, please let us know. We're grateful for any feedback you may have. With that said, it is with great pleasure to introduce you to our chairpersons, Felipe and Sanjay, who will be introducing the conference, will be setting the stage for this exciting event. So I would love to bring Sanjay and Felipe into the stage. Hi, Felipe. Hi, Sanjay.
Hello, Joel.
Hi.
Hello, Sanjay.
Hi.
Thank
you,
you
Joel.
both for being here. And yes, I think we are all excited for this 2 amazing days of content that we're gonna be having the next following days, today and tomorrow. But how do you feeling, Sanjay? How do you feeling, Felipe?
I think it's a very interesting time in AI, and I think it's because we all know the technology adoption curve, classic curve, but I think there's also similar curves for enthusiasm. There's a similar curve for trust in terms of a technology. There's a similar curve for operationalization, and I think we are at an interesting time because now we're talking about the actual real world application of AI in medical affairs. About two years ago, I was at a conference presenting, and the main discussion there was how in 2 years' time, no one in field medicine will have a job because AI would have replaced everything. And that was kind of that era where, yes, this is going to transform things. That's clearly was wishful thinking. So I think we're much more at a practical time, and this is reflected in the agenda, in the sense that there's a number of different sessions looking at all the different components in medical affairs, from strategy to medical devices to sentiment to publications, and how AI can practically help you solve the problems. So I think it's a very interesting time. And the analogy, just to end with a quick analogy, which is, self-driving cars. We're all familiar with it, and its technology is growing. But the self-driving cars were decades ago were being tested. And what I learned recently was that a Mercedes car in Germany passed a driving test there with no driver in the car. But that was nearly 15 years ago now. So it's kind of the evolution of technology, and now it's mainstream and accepted, and you just switch on your auto and drive. So welcome to an interesting conference for a very interesting age.
I agree.
Well, Sanjay, nice words, and I want to take some of your words also to say my I don't know my expectations on this conference. And first of all, thank you, Joel and Momentum Events, for letting us sponsor the event. I represent the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs. So as Sanjay is saying, it's an interesting time for artificial intelligence. It's also an interesting time for medical affairs. And one of my very first thoughts on this is that as medical affairs professionals, that we are, I would say, scientific driven mindset. This artificial intelligence wave, you can have two options: or struggle with it, or try to learn, adapt, and then manage. Because as Sanjay said, artificial intelligence, we could think of this as a problem solver. you know it's not the end of our role, but it's just another way to solve our problems in medical affairs. So artificial intelligence will help us to listen better, listening things that we are not used to listen before, also to analyze better, because at the end of the day, what medical affairs is doing is try to capture insights from different sources. So artificial intelligence will help us by analyzing this better. Also to work better, because then artificial intelligence will also help us by work with more efficiency in our day-to-day jobs, to communicate better also. It's important that, and also of course to generate data important for our medical affairs strategy. So I'm really excited of this event, because then we will learn about big data again, about what is machine learning and what's the benefits of machine learning. The We will learn about natural language processing. Also, we will have some interesting topics about now software as a medical device. That it's something that it's even not regulated so far. We have some hints, but we're just learning about this and how to deal with this in the medical affairs point of view. So we truly believe at the ACMA that medical affairs should raise the standard, and supporting this type of events will help us, all the medical affairs professionals, to leverage more on these type of tools. So happy for the invitation, and welcome to everybody.
Yes, welcome to everybody. Sanjay again and Felipe, thank you so much for being here. Felipe will be presenting as well tomorrow. Sanjay will be presenting in just a few hours. So be sure to check those presentations. It's going to be an amazing 2 days full of incredible content. So again, thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Felipe. And with that, we're going to be starting with our first presenter. So I would love to first presentation of the day, in which we have a great presentation, someone who will be setting the stage on what AI is in the healthcare industry and what we have for the future within. His name is Alan Polnariev, who is a national clinical account director at AstraZeneca. So let's welcome Alan.
Hello, my name is Alan Polnariev. I'm a National Clinical Account Director for AstraZeneca, and I'd like to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to speak on something I'm particularly passionate about. And that passion is providing value in healthcare by ensuring that the right patient gets the right medication for the right reason, and doing so by leveraging innovative technology, such as artificial intelligence, to more efficiently and effectively advance the development of commercializing cutting-edge therapies. In this talk, I'm going to discuss healthcare's gateway to the future and what I believe the artificial intelligence as the key to unlock those mysteries behind how we can make healthcare deep into the 21st century to not only improve the lives of our patients, which come first and foremost, but also to improve the processes by which pharma, payers, policymakers all review and assess the impact that these medications have on our healthcare system. First, my disclaimer that the presentation and the opinions I express in this presentation are the views of mine and mine alone and don't reflect any employer, past or present. The case studies and examples I describe are from my own literature search, and I have absolutely no ties or no connections to any of the companies I mentioned in this talk. And so to begin, I want to emphasize that the applications of AI are already present in our everyday lives, from Amazon suggesting items that we might be interested to purchase, Facebook advertising certain kind of advertisements or vendors that might be of interest to us. I think this is something we see in our everyday lives. Unfortunately, I believe healthcare is a little bit behind the eight ball when it comes to how we in healthcare can use AI. Although we're currently under a sea of activity, and I'll show you that in the next slide. But what I want to show here is what makes me excited. Why am I so passionate about AI? So a quick example from a couple of years ago in Japan. A 60-year-old woman initially diagnosed with and unsuccessfully treated with acute myeloid leukemia. The hospital, this is the University of Tokyo Medical Center, happened to have had access to IBM's AI's Watson system. And what Watson did was look at the genetic information of the patient and compare it to about 20 million oncology papers. It helped diagnose the patient with an extremely rare form of leukemia. And I emphasize that word help because at the end of the day, Watson and all of AI are just tools for humans to use, just like any other tool, a very sophisticated tool, albeit, but just a tool to help the humans make our lives easier. Ultimately, the patient responded very well to the adjusted regimen and her life was saved. Most astoundingly of all, the diagnosis made just took 10 minutes. So as I mentioned, we're in the sea of a revolution of how AI is going to change and reshape healthcare. At least this is what I think. AI is involved with many assets of healthcare and specifically drug development. And we'll talk about that from preclinical development to clinical, drug repurposing, data processing, and many different types of organizations, from pharma to tech CROs. Many people have a stake in how healthcare can be improved, and AI is the basis of that, at least in this slide. But I think we're in the midst of a change where even more companies are going to get involved. And really, the competitive nature of survival of the fittest in terms of how companies will compete with each other for valuable resources and market share. And I think AI is a tool that many will use to improve their outcomes. So to get us started, I want to introduce two key topics and concepts, rather, that I'll be referring to throughout this talk. First is the Internet of Things, which describes the billions of gadgets, hardware, sensors, smartwatches, phones that can simultaneously connect, transmit, and exchange information continuously to other devices within a given network. This Internet of Things and all these devices cumulatively can generate big data for us to work with. But that big data is almost meaningless without the context that something like artificial intelligence would provide. AI refers to the advanced computing technology that displays human-like intelligence. So factors such as organization, planning, problem solving, and so on are mimicked by artificial intelligence. And there are several subcategories of AI, including machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing. But for the purposes of the talk, I won't go into the nuanced differences between these. Just understand that AI refers to an umbrella of different types of categories. Now, the essence of AI is in its ability to self-improve, learning from the original content which was patterned and developed, but then independently collecting information needed to progressively evolve a new cognitive domain. Just like a human intelligence being able to go beyond what it was taught to do, AI has that capacity to progressively evolve. AI software is incorporated into the IoT hardware to offer that intelligence, as I mentioned. IoT developing that big data. AI is what's going to add the context, the meaning, the color to make that big data make sense. What this means, ultimately, putting together, AI has the capacity to keep track of what is going on and react to that data in real time, and perhaps one day ahead of time. So being able to diagnose cancer or an impending heart attack. These are the things that perhaps with the technology advancing at the rate it is, we're already seeing signs where this is where the future of healthcare is going. The premise of my talk, if there's anything you get out of it, it is the following. AI and IoT can ease the administrative burdens and the repetitive tasks that inundate healthcare. Currently, to date, the administrative aspect of healthcare accounts for about a third of all national spending. So by easing these administrative burdens, we're able to improve the analysis of big data for improved decision-making and ultimately improve customer service for the key stakeholders in healthcare. And if you've ever seen any of my talks, I always refer to the 5 key stakeholders in healthcare: the policymakers, the payers, pharma, providers, and most importantly of all, the patient. So how does AI help the patient? Well, if you imagine, wearables allow for continuous monitoring of a patient's health condition, especially if you think of the elderly. Maybe they live alone, maybe they're away from their children and they're not able to have a continuous monitoring of the patient's status. Well, having a continuous eye in the sky for the patient to assess their vitals, this is going to be critical in terms of monitoring the patient's well-being. So if any deviation in the health status or metric of a patient, that can trigger an alert to be sent out to and responded to in real time. So for example, and this is the first case study in the presentation, biotelemetry has a platform which connects blood pressure readings automatically sent from the blood pressure readings of the patient's machine or their smartwatch to a virtual platform, and thus allowing the patient to test at home and readily share the results with the providers. So the implications of this, well, not only blood pressure, but other types of organizations may be monitoring for patients' O2 levels, the glucose levels, A1C, things of that sort, where we're able to monitor these metrics and their values in order to assess whether the patient's within normal limits for their disease. And ultimately, the real-time recognition and anticipation of potential health issues can lead to reduced healthcare resource utilization, such as emergency room visits, impromptu hospital admissions, things of that sort, and facilitating in-home healthcare, such as telemedicine. And so if there are any major themes that you'll see in my talk is the ability to reduce healthcare spending, because ultimately at the end of the day, that's what we're going to show return on investment of these otherwise costly endeavors, reducing healthcare expenses and also improving the quality of the care and access to that care by having a patient being able to see their provider from the comforts of their own home. So how does AI help providers? Well, in this era of personalized patient care, leveraging big data to help advance that initiative and hopefully do so at a lower cost is going to be key. And so there are many organizations, one such is Prognos, that have registries and housing huge amounts of data that contain, in Prognos example, 19 billion records for 185 million patients. That large sum of information can be used for a multitude of things. So improving the diagnosis of conditions, early detection, identifying any unmet needs of a condition, identifying opportunities that a patient has to enroll in a clinical trial or develop or be involved with the development of real-world data, and the list goes on. The improved disease identification and diagnosis aspect is the low-hanging fruit for a provider. Obviously, we want to improve the way our patients' health are managed, and part of this can be the earlier, more accurate diagnosis of their condition. So in one example, Echo claims that its software is able to detect AFib with a 99% accuracy compared to the accuracy rate of current human HCPs, which is around 70 to 80%. So if you think of the implications of this, that 20 to 30% of patients that don't have the right diagnosis made sooner, that means that they delay their access to the right medications. And potentially this could be a life-saving change and improvement of their diagnosis. This could be a huge game changer. Microsoft has skin in the game with Project Inner Eye, which deploys machine learning to differentiate between tumors and healthy tissue using 3D radiologic images that assist their medical experts in the radiotherapy, surgical planning, the invasive planning of invasive therapies for patients' treatment. Ultimately predicting patient outcomes and identifying patients at an increased risk of events such as sepsis or falls or heart attack, or estimating which patients need closer monitoring. Perhaps those patients more likely have readmissions, which is a huge thing, or more successfully being able to be discharged home at the right time. So identifying which patients need closer monitoring and which patients may be more likely to be successful on their own after discharge. Looking forward to other ways that providers can benefit. And this comes from the gathering of big data to help support the effective and efficient healthcare operations in a healthcare system. And this comes with the reduction of waste, cost, errors, and fraud. An example of this would be with organizations like Quotient Health, which helps develop software to reduce the cost of supporting EMR, and supposedly done so by optimizing and standardizing the way that those EMR systems are designed. Furthermore, we can use AI to help manage the medical equipment and inventory aspect of healthcare, which is a huge burden just because it's hard to understand how much of stock and supplies and equipment is necessary. You don't want too much where it may expire and be on the shelf too long, and you don't want insufficient amounts where there might be the next surge or wave of epidemic or the new COVID-19 strain, and you want more vaccines. So it is important to understand how AI can monitor for the integrity of the equipment, medical side of things, but also assess the appropriate amount of inventory, especially with supply chain being the way it is these days, understanding the inventory and securing the right amounts of supplies. Another example would be anticipating epidemic outbreaks and seasonal illness trends. So scientists have certain ways of identifying how there's going to be the new outbreak or where the hotbeds of illness may come up. So a great example of this is with malaria, where analyzing certain factors such as rainfall, temperatures, positive cases, this can help scientists understand and predict where the next outbreak might occur. And that is another example. Going back to the telehealth and virtual care as something that is likely to be a mainstay given the growing acceptance by patients and providers alike, there are organizations like Data Health, which use digital platforms to manage the high risk, high cost patients and trying to improve the management of their chronic conditions such as CHF, diabetes, COPD, and asthma, and so on. And it's been estimated, although estimates vary, that the small fraction of patients attribute to a bulk of the spending. So some estimates say it's around 5% of patients attribute about 50% of healthcare spending. 1 in 20 patients attribute to $1 in $2 spent. And so being able to identify that small niche of patients might have huge dividends for both the providers, the patients themselves, of course, and also the payers. We'll get to the payers next, but I want to talk about AI helping pharma. Now, many of us may come from pharma, and so we understand the global dynamics of having a launch is changing, especially from the days of old where it would be easier to launch a product and have it on formulary. Here, it's a lot more competitive, a lot more organizations, and the way we interact with payers and policymakers needs to change. But AI has implications beyond that, going way earlier from the point of drug discovery. AI has the potential to predict how 3D protein structures and their physiochemical properties, such as ionization, permeability, pH, and so on, how that will impact the interactions and the binding of a drug candidate with a target protein site, and potentially the possibility of polypharmacology, which ultimately means the offshoot effects of the downgrade binding of a drug to other receptors not intended. AI-powered research in drug discovery is currently happening. It's a thing right now. So a British-based pharmaceutical company, Excentia, recently announced they have a new management for OCD, and they use AI to help this process to shorten research time from quote unquote several years, 12 months. This is the third project that Excentia has claimed was based on AI capabilities. From the bench side of things, researchers at MIT focusing on E. coli bacteria conducted a molecular analysis of over 2,000 growth inhibiting particles to identify halicin, which is successfully able to kill antibiotic resistant bacteria. Most importantly of all from this case is that the researchers in the study found that this type of molecular analysis using AI will hopefully revolutionize the way that these kind of pursuits are conducted. And this is an interesting example, and this is something I'm particularly excited about, and that's finding the opportunities and usages for failed compounds, breathing new life into a compound that might have been put on the shelf or forgotten about if perhaps it had failed a phase 2 or phase 3 study, and finding a new way that this compound may be able to bind to other receptors, other targets to have implications for other conditions. What that means for the patient is qualifying potential treatments directly into phase 2, because we've already approved that the drug is safe in phase 1, and decreasing the time and expenses invested in research. So currently, the process, the way it is now, clinical research accounts for around 70% of the time invested in bringing a drug to market. So if we're able to truncate that a little bit, that can have huge impact and dividends for everyone involved. We've talked about expediting that process. Now we can talk about revolutionizing clinical trial design itself and potentially selecting the more appropriate candidates for research. If we're able to identify patients who may not necessarily be able to check in with a research center as frequently as needed, and therefore they may be able to be monitored at home. This has implications for the patients that can leverage IoT to help monitor their health status at home. This will widen your patients that are eligible for research, widen the types of research that can be done, widen the types of metrics that can be assessed, and this can have huge impact in the types of data that we're collecting from randomized control trials to real world data. Taking that a step further, we can create virtual or synthetic patient populations to serve as control groups in research. This means faster, more efficient clinical trials, removing the need for placebo arms that may be unethical and We've talked about expediting that process. Now we can talk about revolutionizing clinical trial design itself and potentially selecting the more appropriate candidates for research. If we're able to identify patients who may not necessarily be able to check in with a research center as frequently as needed, and therefore they may be able to be monitored at home. This has implications for the patients that can leverage IoT to help monitor their health status at home. This will widen your patients that are eligible for research, widen the types of research that can be done, widen the types of metrics that can be assessed, and this can have huge impact in the types of data that we're collecting, from randomized control trials to real world data. Taking that a step further, we can create virtual or synthetic patient populations to serve as control groups in research. This means faster, more efficient clinical trials, removing the need for placebo arms that may be unethical and disadvantageous to a patient's health. The time spent accruing patients that would be appropriate for a trial who would only wind up getting a placebo, that's something that can be improved upon. Drug manufacturing can be optimized by avoiding downtimes and unplanned shutdowns caused by equipment failures. So just like a patient's health status to be monitored continuously through the devices of IoT, perhaps you might have those kind of sensors monitoring for the integrity of the machinery that runs 24/7 to produce product or excipient or what have you. So the drug manufacturing aspect can be monitored for assessing if there are any problems with the machinery and anticipating any kind of equipment failure. Moving on to the payers and how AI can help payers, we've talked about how this can improve the lives and the livelihood of the patients. And so if you have a happy, healthy patient, you should be able to have a happy payer. IoT enables patient monitoring in real time, and as we've discussed, significantly potentially cutting down on healthcare resource utilization, from ED visits and impromptu hospitalizations. And sometimes the patients really only need just clinical recommendations, someone to talk to, a provider to guide them in what they should be pursuing, whether they should go to the hospital, whether that's something that they can skip. And so having those clinical connections at the touch of a dial, that would be a huge impact for the quality and the access of healthcare that a patient might have. Payers can leverage data gathered from health monitoring devices for the purposes of their underwriting, pricing, claims operations, and also the risk assessment. So just like providers benefiting from the business side of things, reducing waste and cost of fraud, payers may have something similar as well. And this would have multiple benefits, including increasing the transparency that the payers have with their patients. And an example of this would be Parisian-based company Accurate, which helps insurance providers charge fair rates for their policies, maintain autonomy of their policy creation, and also retain complete control of their pricing models, and also maintaining regulatory compliance within their jurisdiction. Now, many of my talks often involve the key stakeholders in healthcare. And as I begin to wind down this talk, I like to focus on the partnership between these kind of stakeholders. I believe that in order for healthcare to move forward, we need successful collaboration and partnerships between the stakeholders of healthcare. And so a couple examples here: AI in pricing and reimbursement. And so artificial intelligence has the capacity to support HTA evaluations and negotiation revolving around pricing. This is done because we're able to help pharmaceutical companies and vendors identify their value proposition, be able to communicate that, and also identify their way of improving their value story compared to their competitors, and especially in a crowded market, identifying their value proposition based on the data points that they've collected and what they find in their research. Expediting pricing and reimbursement modeling is another aspect where a process that is very tedious, very timely, lots of people involved, lots of hours involved. This is something that is, because it's sifting through big data. And what we're able to do is actually expedite this process because of AI being able to sift through all that tons of information, from randomized controls trials to real world data, HTA submission, pricing modeling, do so quicker and being able to expedite the process. And a company that has a very interesting value prop right there is UK-based Okra Technologies, which has a platform called ValueScope and predicts the price and likelihood of successful negotiations with HTA organizations such as NICE, and claims to be able to do so with a 90+% accuracy rate. But that was pretty nice. Now, AI in outcomes-based contracting value-based programs has many different implications here, just because there are so many different ways that AI can be evaluated. Identifying the appropriate patient populations, identifying and controlling the level of risk for OBCs on both sides of the table by assessing the effectiveness of a compound, informing where a drug is best suited within a treatment pathway, and this is based on evidence-based medicine and the available treatment options, identifying and measuring the appropriate metrics that track and trend outcome for a given therapy or obesity. An example of this came a couple of years ago, I think December 2020, when Centene acquired Apixio to broaden the evidence base that the payer uses for their value-based reimbursement. So the platform by Apixio presents the payers and providers with data and feedback on the quality measures that of the services that they provide. Other forms of collaboration are other examples of successful collaboration. One includes Humana partnering with IBM Watson to personalize member engagement, ultimately providing their patients and their customers with accurate benefits, costs, and provider information. Ultimately trying to help the patient understand their out-of-pocket expenses, ultimately to reduce those expenses. AI to predict roadblocks for field reimbursement managers. So as I mentioned before, 5% of patients' costs attribute to about 50% of healthcare spending. So if we're able to identify those patients with perhaps chronic conditions, issues with compliance, adherence, or access to certain medications, perhaps there's a way to identify those patients proactively and intervene on their behalf, just like what a field reimbursement manager or a function of the like would do. And organizations like Integratine are using AI to develop risk score models to just help that patient or to help the FRM identify that patient who might have an issue with access and act on their behalf ahead of time. Now, I'm obviously quite optimistic about the implications of AI, but I would be remiss not to mention some of the key challenges that lay on the road ahead. So for poor input leads to poor output. If we develop a AI-based algorithm based out of New York City, for example, and this vendor in New York City only has collaborations and partnerships with healthcare systems in the New York City area, would those conclusions drawn by AI have applicability to a rural Arkansas, for example? We may or may not. Well, there might be unanticipated sources of biases, such as inappropriate weight given to certain data points. And what that can mean is that the black box phenomena or the mystery behind how conclusions are reached can come about. What means is that if there are poor results, perhaps mysterious results, and it's not a lack of confidence in those results, that can lead to public scrutiny, mistrust, distrust in the process. And that can slow the science down and even bring it back. So we need to ensure that algorithms are developed with consideration to diversity, including geographic, clinical, ethnic diversity, and so on. We need more transparent algorithms that are necessary to meet the stringent regulations set forth by policymakers, and people need to be able to see through the black box. The public needs to feel secure that the results drawn by the AI are sufficient and appropriate, and that comes from the regulation of policymakers and partnering with the providers that produce these types of AI endeavors. For AI and machine learning to work efficiently, a training set with at least 2 to 3 years of historical data is necessary. And this is particularly problematic in large organizations, given the number of people involved, turnover. There might be just difficulties and challenges maintaining the data, warehousing that information for several years. So there are a number of challenges in maintaining this kind of information for enough time for the AI to be produced with a robust amount of data. The regulation of personal and medical information, of course, when it comes to the public scrutiny and being very cautious with how their information, their public, their private information is made public. Other challenges include the regulation of AI-based technology. Now, I don't talk too much about the policymaker side of things here, just because that conversation is so vast and beyond the scope of this presentation. But policymakers and regulators need to adapt their current oversight processes in order to keep up with the advancements made, the lightning speed growth that's been happening in the AI space. So organizations need to collaborate with their regulators to ensure that there's a cost efficiency and values derived from these processes. Breaking down the data silos. So I am a huge proponent of partnerships, obviously, and avoiding data silos and individual companies not working together. So for the sake of clinical data being disorganized and fragmented across the board, I think that's a reflection of our role for a whole healthcare system. And what that means is that if there are many disjointed healthcare systems not communicating and different types of data that's being collected, that can lead to an increase in the propensity of errors. Just different metrics that are being used, not communicating well, that's where this can stem from. And so larger organizations may also struggle to prove the business value of costly AI projects. It may be hard to ascertain those kind of funds, especially when funds are limited and when there's a number of other competing initiatives that are vying for those precious limited dollars, especially when the long-term return on investment is something that's a time away or in the future. Recruiting and retaining data scientists with an AI skill set. So the last two challenges that I cite are reflective of the human element. So there's a very limited data pool of the data scientists that have this AI skill set. And so if an organization is fortunate enough to have such talented individuals, they need to do their best to recruit and retain them for the future. But on the flip side of the human element is the fear of replacing humans with machines. So if anyone's seen any of these dystopic movies like Terminator, there's always the talk of the machines taking over. While I do think we're a ways away from this kind of consideration, I do think it is imperative that policymakers and regulators make sure that there's a balance of safety, and safety and effectiveness of this kind of AI and solutions of the like, but also in allowing for innovation, making sure that there's not a stifling of the growth of this technology. And so for my final slide, speaking of the role of AI in decision-making going forward, I think we need to reflect back in order to move forward. So reflecting back on some of the key points in this talk, IoT allows for hardware to collect the data, the big data, and AI is what's used to make that data meaningful. As AI continues to evolve, many pharma companies are likely to partner with or acquire external vendors to focus on research efforts, making the drug launch process more quick, competitive, and efficient. AI offers unique opportunities to improve healthcare, but has some significant challenges that lay on the road ahead, as I highlighted. But going forward, what we need to do is begin to identify organizational business strategies and goals, understanding who our personnel are that have certain skill sets that can help drive the science forward and drive our businesses forward. Identifying and assessing the internal and external data sources, such as registries, and how partnerships can stem from perhaps providers working with payers or with pharma to generate the types of information that we need to develop those AI systems. And finally, implementing pilots. So those that are brave enough to actually pursue this kind of science going forward, I think they will be the ones to reap the rewards first. And at the end of the day, if we go back to my thesis and my premise for this talk, AI and IoT can hopefully ease the administrative burdens of healthcare, improve the analysis of big data for the improved decision-making, and ultimately improve customer service for the key stakeholders in healthcare. Once again, my name is Alan Polnariev. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Alan, for kicking off the day with a wonderful presentation. And next, please join me in our next presentation, which is our keynote presentation. So again, please go ahead and access the agenda tab, hover over where it says agenda tab, access that again, and then click on the next session, and I'll see you there. Thank you, everyone.